Yama, my name's Marcelle Burns and I'm a Gomeroi Gamilaroi woman and lecturer at UNE Law School. I'd like to start off today by acknowledging the traditional owners on the country on which we meet today, the Anawam peoples, and pay respect to their elders past, present and emerging, and also to recognise the cultural connections to country of the Dungari, Gamilaroi and Gumbaynggirr peoples. I've worked as a lawyer with the Aboriginal Legal Services doing criminal law for 6 years in Bundjalung country and Gumbaynggirr country, working from Newcastle up to the Queensland border. Working primarily in criminal law. I've also worked with a small law firm doing native title matters in Bundjalung country, and I've been working as an academic full-time now for just over 10 years at UNE and at Queensland University of Technology and Southern Cross University. So at the law school I teach mostly our Indigenous law units, a unit called First Peoples of Australia in the law. And in that unit we look at some really interesting legal issues, a lot of things that are happening currently in Australia, focusing on the relationship between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and governments. So we talk about sovereignty and colonisation, some of the legal doctrines that were used to justify the colonisation of Australia, and how that sort of plays out today in terms of the relationship between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and the Australian nation state. We also look at various colonial policies such as stolen generations and protection policies and the impact they've had on our communities, and also some of the things that have been happening recently to redress some of the harm that was done through those policies. So like a national apology from the former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, and also some of the redress schemes that are happening around the country to provide compensation for members of the stolen generation. We also look at issues relating to the criminal justice system and First Peoples, so looking at some of the factors that lead to the over-incarceration of Aboriginal peoples, some of the policies that are being promoted to reduce Indigenous incarceration, and also associated issues like Aboriginal deaths in custody. Many of you would have been seeing in the news about the Black Lives Matter movement. So we look at some of the issues that are being promoted through Black Lives Matters, promoting human rights for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, but also looking at the ways government work with First Peoples communities and how those relationships could be improved. One of the other topics we look at in this unit is about constitutional recognition. You might have heard about the Uluru Statement from the Heart, which calls for the establishment of a truth-telling commission, the establishment of treaties between First Peoples and Australian governments, and also amendments to the Constitution to recognise an Aboriginal voice to the Parliament, to give First Peoples a say in policies and legislation that affects us. We also look at international law, and in particular the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which was passed by the United Nations General Assembly in 2007, and a number of rights that are set out in the Declaration to help focus the relationship between First Peoples and governments, to give Aboriginal peoples more a say in matters that affect them, and in particular the right of self-determination, which is a right of all peoples, but in the context of First Peoples is an important right because, as Mick Dodson has said, it's the river in which all brother rights swim. We also look at some of the responses from Aboriginal leaders to these issues that we're facing in the legal sphere. So, for example, we look at the Redfern Statement, which was issued by peak Aboriginal organisations in 2017 before the last federal election, to focus on some of the issues that are important to our communities and trying to get governments to have a more proactive role with Aboriginal leaders to shape how our communities run in the future. And finally, we look at some of the unfinished business between Australian governments and First Peoples, so issues like treaties and truth-telling, and also looking at the Indigenous voice to the Parliament and what impact that could have in terms of resetting the relationship between First Peoples and Australian governments. I decided to come to UNE for two reasons. I got a pre-doctoral fellowship, so that allowed me to concentrate on my doctoral studies, but also it's close to my father's family. My father's from Bingra down. It's about an hour and a half's drive from here on the Guida River, so it was putting me closer to country and family on country, so that was one of the things that attracted me to UNE. I also studied at a regional university, so I really liked the environment. It's a bit more relaxed than the big city universities, so it's good to have small classes of students. You get to know your students really well, and that's very rewarding as a lecturer to be able to build relationships with students. Well, I think law's a really good degree to do because it opens up lots of doorways. Lots of people become lawyers, but then a lot of people that study law actually go on to do different things, so like working in government, working in parliament. It just gives you a very broad education, teaching you how political legal systems work, and so it really opens the door to give you the opportunity to influence how law and politics work in this country. Having the knowledge behind you with a law degree is really important.